free when no one's around you, as free as the wind blows, as free as the
Why is this sequence so effective? So I know it goes without saying that the Coen brothers are an iconic and widely celebrated pair of storytellers. From comedies to dramas to thrillers to westerns, they seem to just hit it out of the park time and time again. Did anybody see Hail Caesar? And while I'm not here to talk about the Coen brothers, I would like to talk about a quality of their movies that I really admire. So why is this sequence so effective? So while Coen brothers movies often lack a clear structure and often have an undefined protagonist with no defined message, the events that lead up to this moment in Burn After Reading suggest that Brad Pitt and Frances McDormand are our main characters. So during what is probably the third act, Brad Pitt is snooping around John Malkovich's house when George Clooney enters, and we get a suspenseful comedy of errors scene which ends with, what? All the signs of the tone of the scene pointed to Brad Pitt sneaking out at the right opportunity, praising the Lord that he didn't get spotted, and maybe George Clooney would see him from the window, and the plot would advance from there, but instead what? It gave me this feeling like I had no idea where the story was going to go next, and it also felt like neither did the Coen brothers. The writers of this story vanished, and it felt like the story gained a life of its own, as if it were operating on its own. Because a lot of stories that follow a traditional structure also give the sense that a writer is behind the story. Now, this may fog the suspension of disbelief, but it also can help audiences sink into the escapism comfortably. This is part of what makes the typical villain of the week style of storytelling so popular. We know that the characters probably won't fail, we know the writers have our back, so we can allow ourselves to tune out and have fun. So when Brad Pitt gets shot in the face, it feels like an act of rebellion against the writer on behalf of the story. It gives the world a real sense of reality and skyrockets our sense of suspense. I've noticed that this quality comes through especially when a storyteller knows the structure and the rules of their reality so well that they're able to try to throw themselves off and still land on their feet. An analogy? When I was in college, I took an acting class in the Japanese Suzuki style, which is a style that is entirely different from Western performance. And while my professor did say that none of my students know what Suzuki really is, I'm gonna give my best interpretation. So in this class, we would do exercises where we would march around the room for long periods of time in specific ways. We would practice this until our muscle memory took over and were able to pull it off as if it looked easy. Then we would be in the middle of an exercise and we would intentionally try to throw ourselves off. We would test our own centers of gravity to see how strongly we held up to ourselves. We would create problems for ourselves, and the performance was us trying to solve our own problems. So if you're bored with your writing, or you feel like you know it too well, or maybe an audience member thinks it's predictable, try this as an exercise. And I don't mean this as a solution, but more so as a means to help you find the solution. Try testing the boundaries of the rules of your story. What are you assuming about this world? Break that assumption. The audience will enjoy how you account for it later. Now, to clarify, I'm not advocating for a twist for its own sake, or to create setups that will not pay off, but more so to allow for some inconsistency and wiggliness in your world. And so if it's tone that you're working on, if your story is a drama, try adding some humorous elements. If it's plot, then maybe one of your main characters gets caught up in somebody else's story, completely unrelated to the plot. There are a lot of different ways you can try this. So here are a few more specific ways to integrate this tool into your writing. So one great way to test the stability of your story's foundation is to appeal to the irrationality of your characters. Because I often see stories where the characters' decisions make sense, but they make sense in terms of objective logic, what people should do in that situation. And I don't think that that is what people do in situations. They don't always do what they should. Because, I mean, how many times have you asked yourself, why did I just do that? Allow your characters to have the same kind of inconsistency. Allow them to grow and change in small ways as well as major ways. I have often found that when a story becomes predictable, it is because the tone of the scene is too in line with what actually happens. When the tone becomes too clear, the audience starts to suspect things that go along with that tone. And I'm not saying to avoid tone, but to more so make sure it doesn't broadcast the events of the scene. And so as a writer, try to figure out what your tone is broadcasting, and then have something happen that is antithetical to that tone. See what happens. Now this is not something that is necessary in my opinion, but it can be a small garnish to your storytelling that'll make it taste a little sweeter. Allow for your characters to make inconsequential accidents. This will allow your story to have that wiggly world feeling without it affecting the plot. Here's a great example from the cartoon show Over the Garden Wall.
You play clarinet?
Sorta.
What else do you do?
And that's it. He tripped over some kind of furniture. It isn't a moment that pays off later, nor does it feel like a setup. Little moments like those will make your world feel more real, as well as giving you an opportunity to inject your own personality. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wish storytelling didn't always feel so rehearsed or so polished. I wish it felt a little more wiggly. That's all. Bye. Thank you.